girl. Look, there she was. Fussy, fussy. She loved those curls. Oh, Patrick. There you are. Bella. He did make a pretty little girl, except he wasn't a girl. He just had pretty hair and pretty face. I had the same problem with Jimmy. I took him into the store one day and somebody said, "Oh, that's a lovely little girl you have there." And Jimmy was so mad. And he didn't have long curls either. He just had a very pretty face. There's Marianne. She looks so nice there. That was a very pretty dress. I hope we get some pictures of Maureen, because Maureen always said, "Nobody took pictures of me." I hope there's some pictures of Maureen when she came along. Oh, here we are. Francis' First Communion. And I have a funny feeling that that might be one of the cousins on the east side that made First Communion at the same time as Francis. But whose daughter it was, I don't know. Oh, Marianne, why aren't you here? That's a little Hainer girl. Boy, I can see that. That little girl, that little blondie is a Hainer. This is when the Hainers lived next door to Aunt Mary. Oh man, that little face just stood out like that was, I think, Lisa Hainer. Yeah. There's Uncle Joe. Oh, somebody had a, oh, was this his First Communion day? Yeah. Francis' First Communion. That was in the early 60s. Probably around 61, 62. That looks like Rosemary and Jimmy. It is. That's Rosemary and Jimmy playing in Grandma's front yard. Yes, that was when we lived up above T.B. Lewis down on Gratiot. We had moved back from Chicago when Jimmy was only 6 months old. And we lived down there, and I'll never forget Jimmy. He was only that size when he went out on the back porch. We had no backyard, we had a porch, and he stuck his head between the rails, and I had to call Johnny to come and take the rails out. I was expecting Peggy there. And Johnny had to come and take the rails out so we could get Jimmy's head back in out of the porch rails. Oh. If he had fallen, he would have fallen down to the sidewalk, and I was petrified. He was a little rascal. We didn't have a backyard there, so we used to walk over to Grandma's and play in Grandma's yard. Yeah, Daddy was working for Case Foundation in Livonia. And he used to have to go out of town, so sometimes I would pack up the two little kids and go over to Grandma's, spend the day. Ah, here we go, another First Communion. Now I think this is Francis again. It's probably a different camera, but I think it is. We'll see here in a minute. There he is, it's Francis. That's Francis' first communion at Assumption Grotto. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Those were beautiful days. That's when they had a full school and the sisters were still there. And there's Monsignor Sawyer. And there's, see, Monsignor Sawyer was only an assistant at Grotto then. Bishop Breitenbach was our pastor. And Monsignor Sawyer was there as an assistant. And then he moved away for a while and he came back as pastor. And remained there till he died, and he's still there in the cemetery. But Bishop Breitenbach was pastor at Assumption Grotto. And Bishop Breitenbach was, his first duty as a priest was at St. Margaret Mary's, and he was the priest who celebrated Grandma and Grandpa's, as a young priest, he celebrated Grandma and Grandpa's first Mass, their 25-year marriage reunion Mass. And he was scheduled to say their 50-year marriage reunion Mass. But Grandma died on September the 1st, and they would have been married 50 years on October the 29th. And Bishop Breitenbach said the Mass that day for Grandma's soul. But she was only a few weeks shy of 50 years married when she died. There's Francis' first communion. And there's Johnny again. I swear he was so great. He was part of everything. Bishop Breitenbach was at Grotto, or at St. Margaret Mary's on his first assignment, and his last assignment in Detroit was Bishop of Assumption Grotto, and then he went on to become the Bishop of the Grand Rapids Diocese, and stayed there until he retired. There's Mom and Daddy. And I believe that store across the street was the Big Bear Market. No, it was Wrigley's. Wrigley's Big Bear Market, yeah. Yeah, because we had a market right across the street, and there was a little shop selling women's clothes, or children's clothes and everything. It was everything right there. There's little Eugene now playing in Grandma's front yard. We had Heinrich's Bakery, and we had Weber's Meat Market, and we had Saunders Hot Fudge. Everything was right there by Grotto Parish. Those were in the days when we had neighborhoods full of wonderful people, and oh my heavens, Eugene. Oh Lord, if you get over that fence, you'll go out on Gratiot.
Yep.
Okay. This is a roll of film that was given to us, and Johnny didn't particularly care whether we put this on with the family films. We had a little difficulty with the beginning of the film. We lost just a tiny bit in the beginning because the film broke. But Paul's got it going again now. And as I was saying, Johnny didn't particularly care whether we put this film on because it's his years in the Air Force, and mostly it'll be his buddies and places he's been. There he is. Oh, and I decided to put this film on because even though it's not family, it's Johnny, and Johnny was a very big part of our family, and his years in the Air Force were very important. And in memory of him, I wanted this film to be part of our family film. Johnny entered the Air Force, I believe, was in around the years of 54, 55. He was in for 4 years, but I know he was in those 2 years. When he started out, he thought he might like to be a pilot, but apparently that didn't work out, and he went into the Air Police, and eventually found his way to becoming a chaplain, and that was where he learned to have the desire to maybe even become a priest. But these were the years when he was in Topeka, Kansas, and there he is. There's Johnny showing his pass to get through the gate. The Air Police were he wanted them to act like we was being hauled away for doing something wrong. And I think this was in Topeka. Yeah, he started this out in Topeka, Kansas. And he went into Colorado. He says on the paper, there's Johnny, he said that he went to Colorado, and from there the Grand Canyon. So I think we're going to see those in this film here. And we're going to see the priest that he works for. He spells his name M-E-N-R-I-C-H, Menrich, Father Menrich, who I think had an influence on him when he was considering going to the seminary. I was going to say that I can't tell exactly. Well, that said Kansas on there, so he's probably still in Topeka, Kansas here. I was going to say Johnny was born on August the 25th, 1930. My brothers and I are 2 years apart. I was born in 34, Tommy was born in 32, Johnny was born in 1930. Eugene in 1928 and Frank in 26. Catherine was born in 1919 and Mary in 1922, I believe it was. I know that my mother had a baby that she lost after Catherine. She had another baby that she lost after Mary. And I know that she had a baby she lost after me. So I don't know what it was about having the girls. She lost a baby after every one of her girls, but her 4 boys came along, one right after the other, in fine shape. And there's Johnny. Yeah. I think he enjoyed his years in the Air Force. There he is. What in the heck is he doing? He had another movie camera. That proves it, because he was holding the movie camera to his eye. I always thought the only movie camera we had was Mama's little 8mm, but it doesn't surprise me that Johnny would have one of his own. He was in the Air Force, so... There was one boy there that I recognized. I remember seeing him when I was there. That was the boy. I don't know his name, but I remember seeing him when I was there. Now this was the chapel on the base. And when he was in Topeka, Kansas, I know he was a chaplain's assistant. Yeah. I believe that priest was the second one from the left there. Johnny never traveled overseas during the war. He did travel overseas as a civilian quite a bit, but he was never stationed overseas. Didn't look like it was that hard of a life. But I suppose it's that way. Service is really not that hard unless you're actually in combat duty. Can be a great learning experience if you use it right. Ah, here we are. Usually the chapels on the base are not necessarily Catholic. They're used for Catholic services, but they're also used for the Protestant services, and I believe they even have Jewish services there. They are not always chapels. They don't have chapels for the different denominations of religion. Their chapels usually are used for multi-purpose religious activities. Johnny was single, so he lived in the barracks, but a lot of the fellas that he worked with, I'm sure, were married and had homes and families, either on base or off base. Eugene was a Marine. Johnny was in the Air Force. Tommy was a jet pilot in the Air Force for 22 years. He was a career man. Frank was a Navy man, and my father was in the Navy in the First World War. It was while my father was in the Navy that he met my mother. And Catherine was very special. She was a nurse in the Air Force. Catherine probably saw more active duty than any of them, although Frank was stationed in Hawaii, and they were bringing boys back wounded from the Philippines. And it's funny because I think it was during that time that he spent in Hawaii as a medic in the Navy that he said he used to drive the ambulance from the ships to pick up the boys that were wounded coming in from the Philippines or from the Asian front and taking them up to the hospital. And I remember he telling me that sometimes they would take the boys off the ship in baskets because they had lost legs and arms. And it was during that time that he decided to become a doctor. So service influence had probably a lot of reason why our family ended up doing what they did later on in life. And Catherine was a nurse in the Air Force. I remember it was during the Second World War that the United States Air Force, or the United States, it was an Army Air Force at that time. It was not Army and Air Force, it was all one branch. And notice came out in the papers and the radio that they were very short of nurses. And there was a possibility that for the first time in the history of the United States that they might have to actually draft women because there was such a need for nurses because of all the casualties or the accidents that were happening, or the wounded, I'll say, that were happening during the war, that if they did not get young girls who were nurses, especially single girls, they didn't take married women, but if they did not get enough nurses to join the army, then they would actually have to start drafting them. Catherine was a young single nurse just out of training. She had worked in receiving hospital, and she said to my mother and father, "They need me, I want to go." And my mother and dad, as though they were very much against nurses or any women in the service, they had to agree that the country was in need, and they said okay, and they let her go. And she joined the Air Force. She went down to Albuquerque, New Mexico with Mary, and she stood up for her wedding on November the 6th, 1943. The war was on during that time. We had just celebrated, the week before they left, we had just celebrated Mom and Daddy's 25th wedding anniversary. And it was on their 25th anniversary that we took the famous family picture where you see all of us together. A week later, Catherine and Mary left, went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Mary married Joe. And Catherine stood up for her wedding, and Catherine never came back. She went on to Texas to join what is then the Army Air Force. And she went into service, and she nursed in Texas, and I know she nursed in Augusta, Georgia. And in fact, I think it was from Augusta, Georgia that she left to go overseas. I remember she nursed in Dayton, Ohio for a while too, because I remember going down there with my parents and seeing her when she was down there. But anyway, she went overseas, and she said the day before she went overseas, she broke her big toe, and she didn't dare tell anybody because she wanted to go overseas, and she was afraid they wouldn't let her go. So they sent her over. Of course, the war was in Europe, so she was stationed in India, part of Africa, India, Calcutta, Karachi, Egypt. She went all through that area. And the Second World War, when it ended, she was put on a ship and sent back to the United States across the Pacific. And she had hoped that she would stop in Hawaii on the way back because she knew her brother Frank was there, and she was hoping to see him. However, the ship had some malfunctions that they were afraid of stopping, so they came right back to California without stopping because they knew they were going to need major repairs. Stop for a minute there. Here Johnny, we see, is in the Grand Canyon and in Colorado. I knew that he had that down on his list, so I knew it would be part of this film, which was very nice. No, that's okay, keep going. So we're seeing here the beautiful part of Colorado and the Grand Canyon, and he evidently had a furlough and time to be able to go out to visit all these beautiful sites, which was wonderful. Yeah, there's the Colorado River, and he's in the Grand Canyon. This is nice scenery. But anyway, Catherine has papers that show that she circumnavigated the globe. She went completely around the world in the 3 or 4 years that she was in the service before she came home. And I venture to say that she probably saw more action with regards to the sick and wounded and suffering of the war than any other member of my family. Ironically, and she was the girl. This is very nice because we're getting a look at Johnny's, oh, there's Father. Father M-E-N-R-I-C-H, Menrich. He was the priest that Johnny was chaplain assistant to in Kansas. Yeah. The service was a wonderful thing for my brothers because if you were in service, you were able to get the GI Bill of Rights, and that helped to pay for part of their college education, which was a tremendous help to my parents. Of course, Frank and Eugene had 8 years to do between college and medical school. Johnny and Tommy. Tommy finished college before he went into the service. He had been 3 years in the seminary and then 1 year at U of D. He was a very brilliant student and went into the service then and was later obtained his master's degree from Syracuse University in New York. After he came back from overseas, and he and Irma and the children, I do believe somewhere in the family pictures we have movies of them because we went to see them in Syracuse, New York. Now these are some of the weddings that took place in the chapel on the base in Kansas. Eugene, on the other hand, was only 17 years old when he got out of high school. His birthday was October, so he would have been 18 in October. And he told my mother, I want to join the Marines. And he had a boyfriend that was 6'2" and a great big strong healthy guy. And Eugene came out of high school, he was only about 5'6" or 7" at the most. And he was, I think, around 127 pounds. And my mother took one look at him and said, "Oh yeah, sure, go on down, I'll sign for you." She was sure that they'd turn him down because he was too small and skinny. And when they came home, the big fella that he went with was turned down. He was 4F, and Eugene was taken. And my mother was devastated. So her little boy went in the service, and it was really funny because Eugene said every 6 months they had to issue him a whole new set of clothes, because between the ages of 17 and 19, he grew from about 5'6" to 6'2" or 3, and went from 127 to about 165. And those were his spurt years when he grew. He grew very tall. He grew taller than Frank, and we always thought Frank was the tallest. So Mom said Eugene had a walk that was kind of funny. The boys in high school used to tease him. They'd say, "Hey, Eugene." "Hey, Boyle," they'd say, "we'd love to have that swing on our back porch." Because he had a walk where he just swung his back in. When we went in the Marines, my mother couldn't believe it. He came home on furlough and he was as straight as a ribbon. She said they made him stand up straight, and by golly, he grew like a weed. But those were my memories of my little brothers, or my big brothers, going away into service and the reaction that was at home. But Eugene did a very wise thing because he put his service life behind him first, and he was able to go away to college. And the Korean War broke out later on when he was in med school, and they froze all the reserves, and he was in the reserve. He was within a very short time of getting out of the reserves. And they froze them all and were calling them back into the Korean War. But Eugene got an exemption because he was in medical school studying to be a doctor, and he only had a few months left to be out of the reserves, so he never had to go back in and go to Korea, thank God. Tommy, on the other hand, did go to Vietnam. He was stationed in Cambodia. He went to Vietnam. I remember he left for Vietnam. He was training in the United States to go to Vietnam when my mother died. And he was allowed to come home and be there for her. And after she was buried, he went back and he went to Vietnam. And he was over there for a good, almost a year, probably 9-10 months. And all I can say is I think that everybody that was ever in combat was affected by combat duty. He never talks about it much, but I think I don't think it was very good for Tommy to be in combat and see sometimes his buddies not coming back. Okay, now I think this film is going to end up at Selfridge Field, although I think this is back in Colorado again. It looks like Grand Canyon. And he's got Selfridge Field on here at the end, so I think the end of this movie we're going to see Selfridge Field. That definitely is a Grand Canyon. And his trip to Colorado. There must have been two different trips because this film showed him in Colorado, back at the base, and then back in Colorado again, and I think it's going to end up at Selfridge Field. That's what it says here on the paper. Johnny's life in service was during a peacetime war, a peacetime army, and he was in the Air Force. By that time, the Air Force and the Army was definitely two separate corps. And he did all his duty in the States, and I think he had a more enjoyable time in the service. And although the experience was great, that was something. Look at that, the birds ate right out of his hand. This is what you'll see in the Midwest if you travel. You'll see a lot of Indians and things.
Some of them might even be upside down. I'm just not positive what we're doing. How Capal did this.
Oh, this was the wedding in New York. There's Aunt Agnes getting out of the car with Mama. Yeah, and I know that...
That's it.
Going to go fast.
Some of them might even be upside down. I'm just not positive what we're doing. How Capal did this.